People believed Rob Reiner's story into the moment he passed away. But the truth is, his real story only began after his death. Because that was the moment Mel Brooks finally broke his silence. People always believed Rob Reiner's life was simple to understand because it unfolded in front of cameras, interviews, and decades of successful films that shaped generations. From the outside, his journey looked complete, almost perfectly written, a man born into comedy royalty who went on to create stories that made people laugh, cry, and believe in love again. But what the public never fully saw was the quiet weight Rob Reiner carried behind his confident voice and familiar smile, a weight that followed him long after the applause faded and the lights turned off. Rob Reiner grew up surrounded by greatness, and while many would see that as a blessing, it came with expectations that were impossible to escape. Being Carl Reiner's son meant the world watched closely, comparing every choice, every joke, and every success to something that already existed before him. Rob never spoke openly about how heavy that shadow felt, but those closest to him knew it shaped his decisions more than he ever admitted. He wanted to be respected for his own vision, not remembered as someone who simply inherited talent. Mel Brooks saw this struggle from the beginning. He wasn't just a colleague or a fellow comedian. He was a witness to Rob Reiner's inner conflict. Mel Brooks watched Rob work harder than most people around him, not because he needed to prove his skill, but because he was constantly trying to prove something to himself. Every project mattered deeply to Rob, sometimes too deeply, because each one felt like another test of whether he truly deserved his place in history. As Rob Reiner's career grew, so did the pressure to maintain perfection. His films became cultural landmarks, yet success never quieted his doubts. Mel Brooks later revealed that Rob often questioned whether his best work was already behind him, even during periods when audiences still celebrated him. He worried about relevance, about meaning, and about whether his voice would still matter in a world that was changing faster than he could control. The silence Mel Brooks kept for years was not accidental. It was a silence built on loyalty and respect. Rob Reiner was a deeply private person when it came to his fears, and Mel understood that some truths were not meant for public consumption while a person was still alive. Rob did not want sympathy, and he certainly did not want his personal struggles turned into headlines. So Mel stayed quiet, even when fans speculated and critics misunderstood Rob's emotional distance in later years. What few people realized was how much Rob Reiner carried emotionally when the cameras were gone. He felt responsible for the feelings of others, often absorbing the moods and struggles of the people around him. That sensitivity made him an extraordinary storyteller, but it also left him exhausted. Mel Brooks later shared that Rob had a habit of replaying conversations in his mind, wondering if he had said too much or not enough or the wrong thing entirely. Rob Reiner's love for storytelling was deeply connected to his desire to understand people. He didn't just want to entertain, he wanted to connect. That need came from a place of empathy, but also from insecurity. He wanted to be sure his work mattered, not just commercially, but emotionally. Mel Brooks noticed that Rob measured success differently from most people, not by awards or box office numbers, but by whether someone felt seen after watching his films. As the years passed, Rob Reiner became more reflective, more aware of time slipping away. He talked often about how quickly decades disappear and how little control people have over what remains unfinished. Mel Brooks revealed that Rob sometimes expressed regret over relationships he wished he had handled with more care. Not because they were dramatic failures, but because he believed small moments mattered more than people realized. The public often mistook Rob Reiner's quietness in later years as confidence or detachment. In truth, it was introspection. He was constantly evaluating his life, asking himself difficult questions about purpose, legacy, and whether he had lived honestly. Mel Brooks said Rob feared being remembered incorrectly, not as someone imperfect, but as someone simplified into a one-dimensional success story. Rob Reiner's relationship with fame was complicated. He appreciated the opportunities it gave him, but he disliked how it removed space for vulnerability. He felt that once people labeled him a legend, they stopped seeing the human being underneath. Mel Brooks understood this fear well, and respected Rob's desire to keep certain parts of himself private, even when curiosity from the public grew stronger. After Rob Reiner's death, Mel Brooks finally allowed himself to speak about the parts of Rob that were never meant to be hidden forever, only protected until the right moment. He revealed that Rob often struggled with self-forgiveness, holding himself accountable for moments others had long forgotten. That habit of carrying emotional weight quietly shaped his personality more than any public achievement. Mel Brooks described Rob Reiner as someone who lived with emotional honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. He did not avoid difficult conversations internally, even if he avoided sharing them publicly. That honesty fueled his creativity, but also made life heavier. Rob felt deeply, and feeling deeply meant experiencing both joy and disappointment with equal intensity. The truth Mel Brooks shared painted a different picture of Rob Reiner, not as a man who had everything figured out, but as someone who never stopped searching for meaning. His success did not shield him from doubt, and his talent did not erase his fears. Instead, they existed alongside each other, shaping a life that was richer and more complex than most people ever imagined. Rob Reiner often questioned whether his kindness made him vulnerable in an industry that rewarded toughness. Mel Brooks revealed that Rob believed empathy was a strength, even when it cost him emotionally. He chose compassion over detachment, and while that choice brought him closer to people, it also left him more exposed to disappointment. As Rob aged, reflection became unavoidable. He looked back not with regret alone, but with curiosity about who he had been at different stages of his life. Mel Brooks said Rob spoke about his younger self with both pride and concern, proud of his passion, but aware of how hard he had been on himself. He wondered whether he could have lived with more ease, with less self-judgment. The silence Mel Brooks kept all those years was an act of friendship. He knew Rob Reiner did not want his inner struggles misunderstood or sensationalized. Mel respected that boundary, choosing loyalty over explanation. But after Rob's passing, Mel felt a responsibility to tell the fuller story, not to expose pain, but to honor truth. Rob Reiner's death marked the end of a public life, but not the end of his story. Mel Brooks understood that memory is shaped by what people choose to say and what they leave unsaid. By breaking his silence, Mel aimed to balance the image of Rob Reiner, the legend, with Rob Reiner, the human being, someone who lived, questioned, cared, and felt deeply until the very end. This truth did not diminish Rob Reiner's legacy. It expanded it. It reminded people that greatness does not come from perfection, but from honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to keep creating even when doubt never fully disappears. And as Mel Brooks finally spoke, the silence that once protected Rob Reiner transformed into understanding, allowing the world to see not just the work he left behind, but the heart that shaped it. After Rob Reiner's death, the world paused for a moment, not because people suddenly discovered who he was, but because they believed they already knew him. That belief was exactly what Mel Brooks struggled with when he finally decided to speak. For decades, Rob Reiner had existed in the public imagination as a confident creator, a man who seemed comfortable in his success and secure in his place among Hollywood's greats. But Mel Brooks knew that image was incomplete, and after Rob was gone, he felt a responsibility to share what had been hidden behind that polished surface. Mel Brooks did not speak immediately after Rob Reiner passed away. He waited, allowing the noise of tributes, headlines, and public praise to settle. He understood that grief needs silence before it can accept truth. When he finally spoke, it was not with dramatic accusations or shocking secrets, but with quiet honesty that felt heavier than any scandal could have. He wanted people to understand that Rob Reiner's life was not defined by ease, even when it looked that way from the outside. Mel revealed that Rob Reiner carried a deep fear of emotional distance. Despite working in an industry filled with people, meetings, and constant interaction, Rob feared feeling disconnected from those he cared about most. He worried that success sometimes created walls instead of bridges, and that fame made honesty harder, not easier. This fear influenced how Rob approached friendships, often giving more than he received, because he believed connection required constant effort. One of the hardest truths Mel Brooks shared was that Rob Reiner often struggled to rest emotionally. Even during moments of happiness, part of him remained alert, as if waiting for something to go wrong. Mel described Rob as someone who rarely allowed himself full peace, because he believed peace meant becoming careless. That mindset pushed him to stay thoughtful and responsible, but also meant he lived with a constant undercurrent of tension. Rob Reiner's creative process reflected this inner conflict. He didn't make films casually or lightly. Every decision felt personal, and every criticism felt internal. Mel Brooks said Rob never dismissed feedback, even when it was unfair or shallow. Instead, he absorbed it, sometimes allowing outside voices to weigh more heavily than they deserved. This sensitivity shaped his art but also drained him over time. As Rob grew older, his relationship with failure became more complicated. Early in his career, setbacks motivated him. Later in life, they made him question himself more deeply. Mel Brooks revealed that Rob sometimes interpreted criticism as confirmation of his own doubts, even when others saw him as accomplished beyond measure. He was never satisfied with surface-level success. He wanted assurance that his work still mattered emotionally. Mel Brooks spoke about Rob Reiner's private reflections on aging. Rob did not fear death in a dramatic sense, but he feared unfinished understanding. He worried about leaving behind questions that had no answers and emotions that were never fully expressed. Mel said Rob often talked about how difficult it was to explain oneself honestly without sounding defensive or weak, especially in a public life where perception quickly becomes fixed. One of the most revealing things Mel Brooks shared was Rob Reiner's struggle with forgiveness, particularly self-forgiveness. Rob held on to moments where he believed he could have been kinder, more patient, or more present. Even when others moved on, Rob carried those moments with him, replaying them quietly. This habit did not come from guilt alone, but from a deep sense of responsibility toward the people he loved. Mel Brooks emphasized that Rob Reiner was not defined by sadness. He laughed easily, enjoyed humor, and found joy in simple conversations. But that joy existed alongside reflection, not instead of it. Rob believed that humor and seriousness were not opposites, but partners. That belief shaped his work and his friendships, including his bond with Mel. After Rob's death, Mel Brooks realized how much of Rob's emotional world remained invisible to the public. People praised his achievements but rarely spoke about the emotional cost of caring so deeply. Mel wanted to change that narrative. He believed Rob Reiner deserved to be remembered not just as a successful filmmaker, but as someone who lived thoughtfully, even when that thoughtfulness became heavy. Mel Brooks also shared that Rob Reiner often worried about how his words affected others, even long after conversations ended. He would revisit discussions, wondering whether he had listened enough or spoken too strongly. This awareness made him considerate, but it also prevented him from letting go easily. Rob believed words mattered deeply, and that belief shaped how carefully he moved through relationships. As Mel spoke, it became clear that Rob Reiner's legacy was not limited to the films he created. His real legacy lived in how people felt around him, how conversations lingered, and how his presence made others think more deeply about themselves. Mel Brooks said Rob had a way of asking questions that stayed with people, not because they were dramatic, but because they were sincere. Mel Brooks admitted that breaking his silence was not easy. He worried about how Rob Reiner would have felt about these truths being shared. But he also believed that Rob valued honesty more than image. Rob didn't want to be remembered as flawless. He wanted to be understood. That understanding, Mel believed, required truth. The reaction to Mel Brooks' words surprised many people. Instead of damaging Rob Reiner's reputation, they humanized him. Fans began revisiting his films with a new perspective, noticing subtle emotional layers they had missed before. Scenes that once felt light now carried quiet depth. Dialogue felt more personal, almost confessional. Mel Brooks reflected on how friendship evolves with time. He said knowing Rob Reiner for so long allowed him to see different versions of him, each shaped by experience, success, disappointment, and growth. Rob was not static. He changed, questioned, and adapted, even when those changes were invisible to the public. In his final reflections, Mel Brooks spoke about what Rob Reiner taught him. Not about filmmaking, but about attention. Rob paid attention to people, to moments, and to emotions others might overlook. That attention required effort, and Rob gave it willingly, even when it tired him. Mel Brooks believed that Rob Reiner's greatest strength was also his greatest challenge. He cared deeply in a world that often rewards detachment. He believed understanding others mattered, even when it complicated his own peace. That choice shaped his life, his work, and his relationships. After sharing these truths, Mel Brooks did not claim closure. He understood that understanding someone does not end with explanation. But he hoped his words would allow people to remember Rob Reiner more fully, not as a symbol, but as a person who lived honestly within complexity. Rob Reiner's death closed a chapter of public life, but Mel Brooks' words opened a deeper one. A chapter where success and struggle coexist, where laughter and reflection share space, and where legacy is measured not only by achievements, but by empathy. In the end, Mel Brooks did not speak to rewrite history. He spoke to complete it. He wanted the world to know that behind Rob Reiner's celebrated career was a man who questioned himself, cared deeply, and never stopped trying to understand the human experience. That truth did not weaken Rob Reiner's memory. It strengthened it, reminding everyone that real greatness comes not from perfection, but from sincerity, courage, and the willingness to feel deeply, even when it hurts.